All right. Well, good evening, everyone. It is 5 p.m. and welcome to the joint meeting of the Common Council, the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Board, the Traffic and Parking Advisory Board, and our Planning Commission. This evening, I'm going to turn it over right away to Mark Lyons from the Planning Division to make introductions.
Thank you, Lori. Again, I just want to, welcome everyone to the joint workshop. I appreciate kind of the council members and all the boards and commissions making some time available tonight. We thought it'd be easier to do this kind of all in one shot, have the consultants here present to everyone, and then we'll actually go through the normal official approval process probably later here in November, early December. But chance to all get together and show you what we've been working on and hopefully facilitate some great discussion. So we have Ayers and Associates in RDG Planning and Design. We're going to break kind of the presentation up into two segments that were the two segments of the Jackson Street Corridor and Safety Study. First, Marty Schukert with RDG Design will be going over the land use plan, or what we call Envision North Jackson. It is essentially the roundabout at Murdoch north to the 41 interchange. Following his presentation, we'll do some Q&A. Then we'll switch over to the southern part of Jackson, which is Church through the Murdoch roundabout, where the safety study was taking place. And Kenneth Voigt from Ayers will be facilitating that part of the presentation and discussion. We just ask that if you do have questions as you go along, please enter them kind of into the chat, and we'll try to make sure we respond to everybody. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Marty for the start of the presentation.
Thank you, Mark. It's good to be with you tonight. I wish we could all be together in person, but we know that isn't happening. So I'm going to talk about a concept for land use and transportation in the Jackson Street Corridor north of Murdoch. We really look at this as being a 20-year plan in many ways, that it includes a good deal of development, significant transportation improvements, but really meant to be something that will evolve over time, as you will see. Next slide, please, Stephen. So our study areas, as we mentioned earlier, and we're doing two presentations today. The first is from Murdoch to I-41, our very diverse North Corridor. And then Ken will talk about the much more granular existing framework south from Church to Murdoch. Next slide, please. And continue on to the next one. When in this study, we did a rather extensive level of discovery and economic analysis as well. As you know, the North Jackson Corridor is a real hybrid. It has two segments of significant development south of Packer, and then adjacent to the county park north of Snell, including the North Park neighborhoods. So we start out looking at existing land use. The areas in between, effectively north of County Road Y and between Packer and Snell, are really much more of a blank canvas right now. And a lot of the development ideas focus on those, whereas the build-up parts are a bit more incremental. Next slide, please. This simply shows the concepts included in the current 2018 comprehensive plan that identify these unbuilt or undeveloped areas, for the most part, that are not public facilities, as various kinds of mixed use. So in other words, it's up to us to figure out what those mixed uses are. And so we get into a little bit more greater level of detail than that. Next slide. One of the components of the study included what we refer to as a visual listening or visual preference survey, where we showed people a series of images, cued what those images were about, and asked participants, of which we had about 150, to respond favorably or unfavorably about what they were seeing. These are the images that receive the top ratings, and we can derive certain conclusions from these. A street character that includes landscaping and pedestrian or bicycle access, with a rather clean and multimodal look. The ability to get across streets relatively safely and easily. Development character that is 2 and 3 story in scale, somewhat what we sometimes refer to as urban/suburban in scale, not strip commercial, but mixed uses, and a sense of gateways as well, of having urban design features that mark out specific places and areas along the corridor. So within the limitations of this kind of very long range plan, we tried to reflect these preferences in the overall concept. Next slide, please. We also included a fairly focused but helpful market study that looked at future community growth. Next slide. Projecting a population in the range of 72,000 over our planning framework, at likely housing demand and affordability. We're suggesting in this study, which does not rise to the level of the current RFQ that's out for a more complete housing study, that we will absorb or generate a need for about 150 to 160 units per year in the overall city over a 10-year period, and then we can project that onto a 20-year period as well. That's significant in terms of looking at the amount of housing that we're suggesting in the corridor and its consistency with what the markets are telling us. Next slide, please. It also included a study of retail opportunities. This is what we refer to as a gap analysis that looks at how people are spending money in the general area and in the city as a whole versus the amount of supply, that is, sales revenues that are taking place in each of these respective areas. And that kind of balance-imbalance analysis gives us the ability to identify opportunities and strengths. Opportunities where we have a gap, strengths where we're actually importing dollars from outside. So the opportunities are features like furniture stores, general merchandise, specialty foods, and beer, wine, and liquor. That the fourth bullet point there is something that's usually realistic, although it's not necessarily what we would build a plan around. The strengths include electronics, building materials, groceries, clothing, sporting goods, food and drink, and lawn and garden stores. And we're not just here looking at the corridor, but looking at the overall primary and secondary market areas that are a certain radius away from the area that we're studying. So that gives us some guidance in terms of what we could sustain in the market in terms of both commercial and residential development. The ingredients of the recipe. Next slide, please. As we look at urban corridors like Jackson Street, we have developed and been speaking at national conferences about a concept that we refer to as corridor urbanism, of taking a lot of the current trends in urban design and planning and extrapolating those to the environment of an urban corridor. In a lot of times, these kinds of studies conjure up a future that isn't necessarily all that realistic, and try to make everything look like a village. And we're on a major transportation corridor, so an approach that's a little bit different from that, we think, is more fashioned to the exigencies of a corridor. We know there are some specific opportunities along North Jackson, an interesting and unusual mix of businesses and destinations, with a strong, really very strong job center on the east side of the corridor, and opportunities for residential development on the west side. We have a good deal of underused land, significant job centers, a major public open space that's a huge resource in the county park, and some room to work with in terms of the width of the street. The principles of corridor urbanism that we apply are really fivefold. One is reality and respect, looking at what's there, working with it as part of the context and economic life of the corridor, and working with that to generate a good environment and a better environment over the years. Injecting as many residents as we can into what otherwise have traditionally been commercial corridors, when the demand for bricks and mortar commercial is not what it used to be. Of taking advantage of opportunities and providing people with orientation to where they are, of providing multimodal transportation, of addressing functional problems with vehicular movement, but also providing transportation choices, and finally creating a positive urban environment. We have a lot of sub-features under this, which are included in the document, but these are the overall principles that guide us when we look at urban corridors like North Jackson. Next slide, please. So now we get into the planning itself, that there are certain trends that are leading us to conclusions. One is moderate population growth that will give us a city of about 74,000 within a 20-year time frame. A declining medium and long-term demand for commercial space. We really don't see the trends that we've experienced in retail reversing. And so commercial development in terms of the retail perspective is very much strategic and limited. We have the distinctive presence of major job centers and industrial development along the eastern edge of our study area, evolving transportation preferences that include a growing demand for more sustainable transportation, as well as pedestrian access in local areas and bicycle access as well. And finally, an increased demand for greater land efficiency, for not wasting land on parking, for example, that's unnecessary, and trying to get the biggest bang for our buck of infrastructure and development as we possibly can. Our strategies to deal with these include a good deal of residential, as you'll see, that mixes densities, of mixing land uses horizontally rather than vertically. So many times people have been proposing residential development over commercial or retail. That's producing a lot of vacant retail space. We're suggesting here a mixed use concept, but one that mixes uses horizontally and really makes the relationship between commercial and residential development very permeable and organic. Of focusing on commercial infill at a small scale, as well as enhancement of what we have, including an upgrade to our primary shopping center, the Fairacres Center, internal streets, thinking about an overall web of circulation ways that do not rely entirely on the main line of North Jackson, but also build secondary connections that are multimodal, bicycle friendly, and pedestrian friendly. And finally, providing opportunities for both new large scale industrial and smaller scale startup and enterprise industrial. So we really see this corridor as being an interesting combination of residential development, commercial development, and industrial development as well. The concepts related to this include an enhancement district that that primarily focuses on the area from Murdoch to Packer, of infill on small sites from a commercial point of view, of creating new neighborhoods that are connected to one another, of viewing the I-41 interchange as a mixed-use opportunity, um, providing significant industrial corridor on the west side, and particularly along Main, and of overall connectedness of all modes of transportation. So now, in the remaining time, we're going to look in a little bit more specific way at the various sectors of the North Jackson study area. Stephen, if you could turn to the next slide, that would be great. As we looked at North Jackson, it divides fairly naturally into four strategy areas. The southernmost being, again, the primarily built-up area from Murdoch to Packer, which we've called the Enhancement District. So in this area, policy involves a little bit of infill development, but also enhancements to the road and multimodal transportation environment. So this really gets into connectivity, into linking features like North High School and Oaklawn Elementary to the overall structure of the street, providing better pedestrian features, and generally making the urban part of the corridor better. Mid-Jackson is a major development area. We have a lot of land to work with, primarily thinking about how that can develop residentially on the west and industrially and commercially to the east. A significant element of this is the extension of Furneaux Avenue to Vinland, where it then takes up and heads farther west to the I-41 interchange. So that gap between Vinland and Jackson is part of the framework of this this section. The third, North Park, includes some minor amount of infill residential, but also how we can take better advantage of the wonderful resource of the county park from a linkage point of view. And then finally, the interchange, a concept for how the south quadrants of the interchange can develop effectively over the years as a mixed-use district. Next slide, please. So now as we look in, and this shows the overall transportation concept. We'll get into that on a segment by segment consideration. Next slide. So next slide, Steve. Thank you. So you'll see in the document detailed plans both for transportation and land use that are annotated. So we think that a picture can be worth a lot of paragraphs and words that points the way to different ideas and recommendations along the corridor. The major land use features here are some infill residential development north of Fairacres Center and extending Packer Avenue to take advantage of, again, some open land and residential possibilities. There's a significant number of enhancement ideas that include an improved greenway and pedestrian way along the street, better off-corridor bicycle connections as well that you'll see in the next slide dealing with transportation improvements. In the next slide, you'll see what these look like. So next slide, please. We did a little bit closer look at Fairacres Center that provides ways of providing better pedestrian and also bicycle access into the center through interior streets. Right now, it's a little bit sketchy to walk through parking lots to get into the center, but there's better connectivity both to Murdoch and to North Jackson, as well as to the neighborhoods to the north. And that connectivity is a very important element of the entire scheme. Next slide, please. The transportation concept focuses on better pedestrian facilities, both from the main bikeway corridor along Smith Avenue, improved pedestrian crossings at Packer and Smith to the high school and to the west side of the street, as well as improved sidewalks and pedestrian connectivity, both on the main corridor and off it along the Wisconsin Avenue alignment as well. There's also some infill medium density housing on vacant sites and a greenway that helps to connect neighborhoods to Oaklawn on the Oaklawn School on the east side of the street. We're also proposing in this scheme an eventual connection of Geneva Street that really helps the connectivity and opens up some other industrial and business development opportunities between Maine and North Jackson. Next slide, please. Then, as we get to Mid-Jackson, the land use concept really gets to be very residential, with concepts for plats that we've laid out here. Not that people will necessarily build them exactly like this, but it presents ideas. Some industrial and enterprise development along the railroad corridor, the extension of Furno. Respect for the need for storm drainage and storm water management as well, and importantly, the development of connections that you'll see in the transportation concept. You'll also see on the east side of Jackson that we are suggesting opportunities for smaller scale business startup and flex building uses. Again, complementing what's there, but providing a type of development that is often very much in demand, but not always very much accommodated within contemporary settings. Next slide, please. You'll notice as well here in the transportation concept that supports this, the idea of using secondary access as well as pedestrian facilities along the main line of the street. In this case, linking up the loose ends of Logan Drive to provide what's effectively a backage or rearage road between Snell and a mismarked Furno Street that shouldn't say Snell and is actually corrected in the document. That is a way of providing more comfortable local access that is multimodal and can be in a lot of ways more comfortable than trying to force pedestrian and bicycle traffic onto a major arterial. Main Street remains the primary north-south bikeway with its bike facilities, and then through a better connection into the county park that is going to be online with the Snell Road project to be able to provide multimodality on the east side as well. Next slide, please. So now we come to the North Park area where there are some residential infill opportunities, some service commercial, but the big news or big proposal here involves connectivity among neighborhoods and into Winnebago County Park. This is probably a good point because the last place where we have major residential development to talk a little bit about how this is consistent with markets. We're proposing an opportunity here at full build out, consider that to be 20 years or 2040 population of a capacity of about 1,200 units, with a relatively even distribution of single family, medium density that is attached, townhouse, various kinds of medium density settings, and multifamily. adding up, as I said, to about 1,200 units. So that is effectively a third of the city's total housing demand over a 20-year period, which we think is a pretty reasonable number to assign to this specific amenity-rich development area. So it's not all up here, but if we imagined about a third of the housing geography being developed along this North Oshkosh corridor, that feels about right and pretty consistent with what an overall housing and comprehensive plan for the city winds up showing. Next slide, please. So here you can see the extension of the secondary systems, as well as a significant central access into the county park with its trail and bike facilities completed between Snell and County Road Y, and then as a side path back over to the North Jackson main line. Next slide. And then finally, we come to the concept for the I-41 interchange that envisions a office park and office related uses, lodging, assuming that someday we'll all be able to travel again. I'm optimistic about that, and with that. Commercial and office development surrounded again by new residential growth south of Indian Point that's designed to mix densities and to provide something that we think is significant, and we know the county did as well in our conversations with them, and that is shared use pathway connections to and through the county fairgrounds. Where there are definitely strong visions of how to use that property in a more complete and year-round way. The next slide will then show the transportation concept for this part of the corridor. So next slide, please. There we go. So you can see the shared use path extending through the fairgrounds and then to the north as far as Indian Point, and pedestrian connectivity in this part of the development area as well. So it is a long range vision, but we think one that is realistic, that looks at North Jackson in a contextual way. So with that, I will. I think that's probably the last slide. We'll stop my monologue. It's a ton of material to put into 25 minutes, but hopefully I've done that well, and it will pique your interest in terms of looking at and reading through the final the draft document that's on that I know you all have access to. So with that, I'll stop and take any questions that you might have.
So there's no questions in the chat box yet, but if you have any, you can type them in now.
There might be more questions after people have read it if they haven't already too, but
yeah, just keep going.
Okay.
Mark,
I'm sorry, I did forget. I'm sorry, I did forget something. There is another slide. There is I'm sorry about that. There is an implementation program in the document, which you see summarized here, that are divided into short term, that is from 0 to 5 year increments, medium term 5 to 10 years, long term 10 to 20 years. Long term really involves a relook at what's happened and a reprogramming based on what the future in 10 years looks like. But the short-term connections involve the connection. This is within the next 5 years. The connection of Furno from North Jackson to Vinland, the beginning of the corridor enhancement program, and beginning to fill some of the service road gaps farther north. We know there are projects like Snell Road that are online as well. The improvement of sidewalks and sidewalk continuity in the area south of Packer will also be a phase one or short-term improvement. So again, those are some of the ways to begin the project, really dealing with the build-up areas, and then as development takes place and builds on that momentum, moves off into the medium term as well. So sorry about that. Forgot the implementation slide. I did get a question from Adam. Is there any area of Jackson that could not feasibly have sidewalk or bike lane connections added? Really, our sense here is that along Jackson, there is enough room in almost every place for sidewalks, or on one side, a shared use path. We aren't proposing bike lanes as such on Jackson itself, and are interested and suggest as a new way of looking at it, the use of the secondary street system, the parallel connections both east and west, and as importantly north and south between neighborhoods, as a place where a lot of local road and active transportation movement takes place. So there is a jurisdictional issue, we know, with the township and the city, that solving that problem is a short-term solution, but there's not a geographic reason why that can't be done. From the mayor, what is meant by open storage site development under short term? That's a residential infill site. There's some land in the area south of Packer and on the east side of the street, that's used for really kind of semi-industrial uses right now. And so we're suggesting that might make more sense in a more industrialized part of the corridor, and open up a site for infill residential development. It's actually quite near the school as well. The third question, I appreciate the image currently up with sidewalks that are not exclusively straight and boxy, and with a landscape median strip rather than a paved turn area. Yeah, that is part of the enhancement idea, and also there's no reason why sidewalks need to be in an absolutely straight line, particularly in an area like this where we do have the space with some parking lot redesign and some redistribution to do something that's really a lot more relaxed and has a lot more personality in this built up urban area. So hopefully that answers the questions. I am good for about another half hour. So Charlie Cowell, who's my partner in the project, will be here as well. I have to jump off because I have a presentation about 1,000 miles away from you that I have to do as well tonight. But we appreciate your attention and your letting us take and giving us the opportunity to think with you about this very interesting and potential laden corridor.
I think we can jump ahead to the short term. After that slide there, we'll move to the next slide. Okay, the historic Jackson Street corridor. what I'd like to do is give some background and some information on existing conditions, and then look at the types of improvement alternatives that we look like at. Next slide, please. Okay, the purpose of this study was to really look at traffic safety and quality of life analysis. We identified existing traffic speeds. We looked at what current crash and safety issues were along the corridor, and how is the corridor currently operating. And then we dove into evaluating different cross-section improvement alternatives that we'll describe in some detail and what they look like. Next slide. Okay, you can see here, currently traffic ranges between 10,500 near Church Street to up to 17,000 vehicles per day in the north end. The graph shows a very flat or slightly decreasing trend since 2006, I believe. So it really is not a growing traffic corridor. It's been pretty flat that way. But we looked at what's it going to be in the future, and we relied on the East Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission with their land use and transportation model to give us projections. And those projections kind of confirm the existing trend of about 0.5% per year annual growth rate. And you can see what the outcome of that is. That's about just under 12,000 vehicles on the south end and a little bit over 18,000 vehicles on the north end. So fairly consistent through time without a whole lot of change. Next slide. So we heard a lot about traffic speeds and concerns about traffic speeds. So we went out and took weekday traffic speed studies over 24-hour periods. And you can see the slide, the top slide in the upper right corner, Congress Avenue, between 87 and 90% of the traffic is exceeding that red bar that's on the slide. And you can see all the traffic to the right of it is exceeding the posted speed limit. And then also at Scott Avenue, a similar type of phenomenon, between 68 to 92% exceeding that 30-mile-an-hour speed limit. And this was consistent with previous studies the city had done in 2016 and 2018. So there is a speeding problem with the 30-mile speed limit, and you can kind of see how that looks out there. Next slide. So safety, a critical concern always is what kind of crashes are there, collisions, and what the patterns are. 2016 was the highest year for crashes along this segment of the roadway. There were 75. The typical crash patterns, and not really surprising with a 4-lane roadway. Left turns, some rear end crashes as people stop to slow down, make a left turn or right turn. There's no turn bays for any of that. They can get out of the way. And then just changing lanes or sideswiping cars that are in the lane adjacent to them. Next slide shows the highest crash intersections. Murdoch had 16 crashes per year. And we also are showing a rate there in parentheses, a 1.56 per million entering vehicles at the intersection. And I'll talk about that a little further. New York Avenue had 13 crashes per year. That's a rate of 2.04. It had the highest rate. And then Irving Avenue with 6 crashes per year. After turns were restricted at New York Avenue, that 13 crashes per year was reduced to 5 crashes over a 12-month period. So that was an effective way of dealing with some of the left turn crash patterns that were out there. Next slide. We conducted, as part of this study, 3 public engagement meetings. You can see the dates there starting December of a year ago, and then spring of this year, and more recently on the 21st. Our meetings went quite long with a lot of discussion, as you can see by the photographs. Our last meeting was a Zoom meeting because of the pandemic that everybody's dealing with right now. And we had good participation on that as well. Next slide. So what I'd like to share, and this is kind of the telling part of how people feel about the corridor, I categorize these over those 3 sets of meetings. There was a fair amount of consistency in comments. And what were the top 10? It's like David Letterman's top 10 public meeting comments. Next slide. Pedestrian safety. This overwhelmingly had the highest number of comments. Pedestrians feel unsafe on the sidewalks adjacent to the speeding traffic that we measured out there. A lack of marked crosswalks. And bus stops are also people stops. So people are using the bus have to be able to cross the street. And then you always look at schools and parks as generators as well. Concern about safety at the Nevada Avenue intersection. Traffic, pedestrians generated by the new school proposal that I understand may be on a referendum. The Murdoch roundabout, as far as pedestrians crossing at some of the approaches. Again, what Marty indicated, a need for sidewalks throughout the corridor. You can see the bus stops and park crosswalk comments, and then in the Nevada school zone area. So there's a lot of concern about pedestrian activity and their safety as well. Next slide. There you see the speeding. Some of the suggestions were to consider using traffic taming tools to reduce the speeds. And then a question came up, well, how about putting parking on the outside lanes to slow traffic? Again, residents reported difficulty on the 4-lane roadway to exit their driveways because of the higher speed, roadway noise, and then the need for some street lighting improvement, which is fundamentally a pedestrian enhancement as well. Next slide. Snow, and we're going to be getting into that. With the sidewalks adjacent to the curb, adjacent to the traffic lanes, there's really not any area to store snow during the winter time periods. And then if one of our improvements looked at bump outs at the several intersections, and then who's going to take charge of snow removal at the crosswalks so that pedestrians can use those crosswalks. Potential backups of traffic behind a bus stop. Redesign the street is one of our alternatives, and will emergency vehicles be able to go through the corridor? And then another consideration to look at rerouting Highway 41 as an alternative route when there's congestion or crashes on the 41 route. Next slide. Number 10, we're going to talk a little bit ahead of time about roadway redesign because that was part of our charge. The area south of Murdoch, as you come out of the roundabout, it has 2 lanes heading southbound, and how do you transition into a redesign that has 1 lane heading southbound? Driveway safety in that area or transition area. Extend the design north of Nevada so that those residences in that area receive the same benefits as opposed to being in an extended transition area. One suggestion was to close Nevada Street east of Jackson, make it one-way. Looking at a full roadway redesign, and we'll get into what that looks like, may provide a safer condition for cars at Nevada crossing Jackson Street, because you're only crossing basically 2 lanes plus a left turn lane as opposed to 4 through lanes. And then consider how traffic gaps coming out of a roundabout into the transition area for those people that live along that area, will they still be able to get in and out of the traffic stream when they go to their driveways? That's the 10th one. So now we can kind of get into some of the meat of what we've been looking at here. We can go to the next slide, please. Part of the public engagement process, we asked the public to identify some of the key criteria they thought this should be viewed at as far as for improvements. And maximize safety always is the number one thing, and it rightly should be. To minimize congestion delay, though that's a performance, how is the roadway going to react or traffic? To tame traffic speeds and enhance walkability. Those all resonate with what I would call the comments of those top 10. Acceptability, not necessarily performance, how is traffic going to flow and pedestrians going to get about, but more additional considerations for how to make this acceptable. Improve driveway access, you heard a concern about that, the snow storage, the traffic noise, and improve traffic and pedestrian lighting. So we looked at this, and we'll have a slide toward the end that says how these improvement options perform based on those criteria, which, by the way, are very standard type of criteria that I would accept engineers, city officials, and the public to expect an improvement to satisfy. If we can go to the next slide, please. So we've been talking about some of these roadway improvement options. What are they? So we'll go into some details here. The next slide kind of lists, I call it the do nothing. Maintain the existing street cross section from Church all the way up to Murdoch as a 4-lane roadway. And then we talked a little bit, tipped our hat to some redesign options, and that's part of our charge in this study. A full redesign all the way from Church Avenue to Hobbs. And we've got a couple of drawings that'll show it. That TWLTL means two-way left turn lane. And then a partial redesign, not to carry it all the way from Church to Hobbs, but to use a New York Avenue intersection as the transition. And then from New York Avenue to Murdoch maintains a 4-lane cross section. So let's take a look at the option 1, maintain the existing cross section. You can see here that the existing road from curb to curb is 45 feet wide. And then we've got between 60 to 65 feet of right of way. 2 travel lanes in each direction. That's what is out there right now, and that's what we were analyzing. Next slide. So one way to address some of the pedestrian concerns and the speeding concerns is to tame traffic speeds. And an effective tool has been shown to install speed feedback signs. They're these radar units. They're not the ones on the trailer with wheels on it that you move around, but they're a permanent sign. You'll see later on a picture of what they look like. You can probably envision it, where it's got the speed limit on it, and then it says, and you can see the locations because it's a fairly long route, capturing traffic as it comes out of town, midway through, and then at the north end as they're heading southbound. These would be on both sides of the roadway to reinforce and confirm. These effectively reduce speeds between 3 to 5 miles per hour. So you can keep in mind what our speeds were that we talked about it from our speed study. Go to the next slide. There really isn't a whole lot more we can do to that route. It has what I kind of define as a highway feel to it, as opposed to an urban street feel because of the 4 lanes of concrete. We maximize a benefit of we have extra capacity on the roadway to minimize delays, particularly when there might be use of a Highway 41 as an alternative route. And it minimizes backups at our signalized intersections because we got 2 lanes at the intersection as opposed to 1. There are drawbacks, though. It's a marginal impact on traffic speeds. It's a marginal impact on safety because you still have the side swipe type crashes. You've got the difficulty of pedestrians crossing 45 feet of roadway with active traffic on it. It doesn't change our ability to store snow and really doesn't have a major impact on reducing noise throughout the corridor. So the next slide describes our two improvement options. The full roadway redesign, we call it the full TWL, it's called a twiddle. One travel lane in each direction with a center two-way left turn lane. You can see that outside those two vehicles, one in each direction, there's a buffer area of about 5 feet between that and the curb. And that's how you start drawing some of the benefits as well as some of the traffic taming. Having one lane in each direction has a tendency, particularly with 11-foot lanes, to reduce traffic speeds, again, by 3 to 5 miles per hour, sometimes 7. And it takes the left turning vehicles out of a live traffic lane. That's that rear end crash problem if they're going into a driveway or at an intersection. Next slide. So the full option, we're recommending the speed feedback signs you saw before, and I got a graphic that'll show that. Additional crosswalks, the use at rapid flashing beacons, which you've probably seen in other areas of the city, and then corner bump outs. And we've got a couple of diagrams here so you can visualize that. Next slide. So a two-way left turn lane, it gets extended all the way up to Stanley. You can see the transition area between Stanley and as you head up toward the roundabout. Next slide. Those are the three speed feedback signs that we've been recommending along the corridor. Again, a little more effective because it's only one lane in each direction that are viewing it. A lot of times they get blocked when there's two cars, one in the left-hand lane, one in the right-hand lane, and the right car in the right-hand lane blocks the vision of the speed feedback sign. Next slide. And then left turns at the signalized intersections. And you can see the treatment here at Irving. Taking the left turns out of the through traffic lane, again, another safety improvement, and accommodating that traffic mobility through the corridor. Next slide. We're recommending high visibility crosswalks. These are what we call continental design. They're the most visible to sight impaired pedestrians as well as to motorists on the roadway itself as they approach an intersection. We're almost developing a cadence there, but these intersection locations are selected to connect origins and destinations on both sides of the sidewalk or of the roadway itself, I mean. Next slide. And these intersections would have corner bump outs. You can see on each of the corners where the crosswalks are, the roadway is narrowed slightly into that buffer area. It reduces pedestrian exposure for crossing the street. And then it also serves as a traffic taming tool. And those types of bump outs have shown before-after studies, again, to reduce traffic speeds and do that, what we call taming of traffic. And you can see the continental style marking that I'm referring to on the crosswalk there as well. Next slide. And here's the Congress Avenue crosswalk. We've got a protected area where that center two-way left turn lane is for pedestrians. So they only have to cross one direction at a time. It's like a one-way street. And then they can check in the other direction to cross the remainder of the street, as opposed to crossing the entire width and looking for a gap in both ways of directions of traffic. And this is the intersection where we talked about having the rapid flashing beacons. And you can see its ability to service the school traffic as well, and the pedestrians. Next slide. So we kind of flip the benefits and the drawbacks. It does reduce traffic speeds. All the studies we've seen and areas we've applied these types of traffic taming tools. And I would add a comment that individually, a traffic taming tool like a speed feedback sign gives you a certain expected reduction in speed. But if you do a collective set of it, there's a synergy between them, and you get a bigger impact on the ability to reduce those traffic speeds with the bump outs and the two-way left turn lane, reduced roadway width, and so on. It enhances safety for pedestrians as well as cars, minimizes pretty hard to do the side swipe. It also reduces rear end crashes, effectively improves pedestrian crossings at the street. With that 5-foot buffer, it does give you some snow storage area. And because we're reducing traffic speeds, it also reduces noise. The one drawback is instead of having 2 lanes in each direction going through the intersections, having 1 lane and then with a left turn lane, it does reduce some of the reserve capacity. Our operation analysis indicates that intersections still operate at level service C is what you design intersections for. But if we have a sudden bump in traffic, its ability to accommodate that goes toward capacity of the roadway itself design. Next slide. What we call 2B, the partial roadway design. On the bottom, you can see from Church Street to New York Avenue, the 1 lane in each direction with the 2-way left turn lane that you saw before. And then on the northern end between New York to Murdoch, you can see the existing 4-lane cross section there. Let's take a look at that one a little deeper. Next slide. And Church to New York Avenue, again, speed feedback signs, ability for crosswalks and for corner bump outs. You remember Congress is where we had the rapid flashing beacons and a crosswalk. We can't really put that on a 4-lane cross section from a safety perspective for pedestrians. So that one's eliminated under this. And then from New York to Murdoch, maintain the existing cross section, but we just still have the speed feedback sign there. So it's a little bit of a hybrid, if you will. Here are the location of the speed feedback signs. You've seen that before. Next. And again, doing the left turn lanes at the signalized intersections. Next slide. There are the high visibility crosswalk locations. Next slide. And the bump outs that could still occur and are recommended at the crosswalk locations for our intersections here. Next slide, please. And here's the transition that we mentioned at New York Avenue. Where, you can see southbound, 2 lanes. And as they get past New York, they merge into 1 lane. You can see northbound, we've got the through lane and then a designated left turn lane. So the through lane becomes a single lane through the intersection, and then it widens out to 2 lanes as it heads toward the roundabout. Next slide. So again, the summary of benefits and drawbacks. Moderate speed reduction because we don't have it along the entire corridor. Again, safety improvements along the corridor. Pedestrian accommodations. You saw we lost 1 set of crosswalks and the rapid flashing beacons for pedestrians. It changes the snow storage on the northern part of it and the noise reduction, and gives a little higher traffic capacity north of New York Avenue. The drawbacks, speed and safety benefits are limited to the maximum they can be on the south segment, south of New York Avenue. Next slide. I mentioned the criteria that we had for performance and acceptability. The first option is first column is maintain the existing cross section, and the full dark black dot performs the best under the option 1. It's moderate under all the other performance accepted criteria with the circles. If we look at option 2A, where we have the full roadway design with a two-way left turn lane, it restricts a little bit of our reserve capacity, but you can see on all the other evaluation criteria, it basically, how do I say, hits a home run. It maximizes the ability. And then option 2B, because it's a partial of each of the two designs, it's more of a moderate impact across the board. I would also note that at the bottom row going across, you see the cost estimates. If we maintain the existing cross section, it's $55,000 to $65,000. Not a whole lot of changes there. We do the full roadway option with a two-way left turn lane, a continuous left turn lane. It's $160,000 to $220,000. And then you can see option B being slightly less at $110,000 to $170,000 to make those improvements on that section. If we go to the next slide, at our meetings, we had some questions that we would try to describe. And so I thought I'd put some graphics together here because you may have similar questions. Let's go to the next slide. A lot of people said, well, can this roadway operate with one lane each direction and a center through lane? These are examples from around the country of roadways that are of the redesign, and you can see the daily traffic volumes. Keep in mind, our traffic volumes range between 10,000 to 17,000 with some minor growth added to it. You can see some of the criteria and national standards. I highlight our Wisconsin DOT first. They have the 17,500. The Federal Highway Administration has a handbook out specifically on roadway redesigns where they say 20,000. Above that, you have to do extra engineering studies. And you can see the National Association of Transportation Officials and also the Oshkosh Pedestrian Bicycle Master Plan. We're in the 20 to 25 to 30,000 vehicles per day. So they can carry the volumes that are on the roadway currently and what are projected for the roadway as well. Next slide. Here are some of the trade-offs between a three-lane redesign and the existing four-lane roadway. Left turns create blind spots with traffic oncoming, and you can see those blind spots, and that's a safety issue. Whereas on the left turn from Jackson Street exhibit to the right little square there, you see the visibility of oncoming traffic is much clearer for vehicles making left turns. They have more distance, in other words. Left turns from side streets, again, with on the left-hand little square there, 2 lanes of traffic. Visibility is obstructed of the second car in the center lane, but for a car making a left turn out of the cross street. Whereas on a 3-lane type of design, there's no blind spot created by the oncoming car. You see the first car and it's easier to make that left turn out. And then for pedestrians, this is one of the reasons that we didn't recommend pedestrian crossings on the 4-lane cross section. The car in the left-hand side on the bottom really can't see a pedestrian in that crosswalk because that pedestrian is blocked by the car in the right-hand lane. You could also see a bus stop condition where the car in the left-hand lane on a 4-lane can't see the pedestrian because the bus is blocking his view. And this is a major safety concern on any 4-lane roadways, particularly with types of speeds we were experiencing here. Last slide. Next slide, please. Some examples of speed feedback signs. We're recommending, if we maintain a 4-lane roadway, option 1, that we have an overhead mounted speed feedback sign. That picture there is on the top is from Madison. So both, it's kind of centered over both lanes so they can see it. Whereas if it was on the right-hand side by the shoulder or the curb, it'd be hard for the vehicle in the center lane to see it. You can see the cost of that. Under the redesign, we're recommending the post mount type of speed feedback sign, about half the cost of the overhead signs. The corner bump outs are about $24,000 per intersection. I don't have a picture there of that, but I wanted to highlight the rapid flashing beacon, the center set of photographs with the yellow pedestrian crossing. Between that diamond-shaped sign and the arrow beneath it are those rapid flashing yellow lights that are push-button activated by a pedestrian. And then you can see the pedestrian hybrid beacon. If there's a desire and a demand to actually have a pedestrian crosswalk on the 4-lane roadway, the city of Milwaukee has implemented these. It's a hybrid beacon, we call it. And it's a little bit like a railroad crossing, and you have to have it on both sides of the street for both directions of traffic. And it's a set of red lights that flash alternately when the pedestrian hits the button to cross the street. Again, telling the motorist to stop, as opposed to the yellow flashing beacons, which is our current state law says yield to pedestrians, not stop for pedestrians. So that gives you the idea of the cost and what some of those improvements look like. Next slide. So our recommendation, you could probably guess from our evaluation and so on, is 2A, the full roadway design, reduce speeds the best, enhances corridor safety, improves walkability with the added crosswalks and a buffer zone. A lot of pedestrians won't walk next to on a sidewalk alongside a live traffic lane without some kind of buffer. Increase snow storage, improve driveway access, and a term that can be defined in lots of ways, resulting in an improved quality of life for the neighborhood that's a residential neighborhood along this part of the corridor. Next slide. This kind of closes out after this presentation. You can see in November a set of meetings where official action will be taken and discussion on these actions, and then scheduled for December 8th for Common Council meeting. That's our tentative schedule there. And additional questions, I'll ask and answer the chat questions. I think we're on schedule pretty good right now. Other questions can be directed to Alexa at the city. So, we've got some chat questions. I don't know if the one I see right now is the first one, but add small park-like residential settings while reducing cross traffic. Intersections with roads like Stanley's, Saratoga, Nevada, west of Jackson and Union all could be prime candidates for such features. I'm a little confused what that's, I think I might be missing part of it.
So let me chime in here. So let's go back up to one that we missed when you were going over the different options.
Yeah.
Lori Palmieri asked this option, which I don't remember which option you were on, with the buffer area.
It was the first one.
Okay. So for option 1, would this be the buffer area be perceived as a pullover?
It's only 5 feet wide with a curb there. You know, effectively it's about 4 feet wide. So it's really not a place where a typical parking stall is 7 to 8 feet wide. So it's pretty difficult for a motorist to say, you know, I'm going to do this to kind of pull over to the side and get out of my car, or just get out of traffic lane because I want to check my email or text message or something like that. No, I don't. My experience is it really doesn't show that way. It tends to create some use by bicyclists because they feel traffic. We've got a street similar to this on Lake Drive in Whitefish Bay, Wisconsin, and it seems to effectively perform that way, even though it's not a marked bike route.
Okay, and then we have something asking about traffic circles or small roundabouts at intersections.
Oh, okay. Many roundabouts or traffic circles. Quite honestly, traffic circles are a treatment you put on neighborhood streets with low volumes and low speeds. And at a traffic circle, you're allowed to turn left as you enter the circle. So you can see that really wouldn't work on this street. And normally a traffic circle, in this case, it would fit within the existing, you don't have to move curbs back on a neighborhood street to make it fit. Sometimes they're raised, sometimes they're just got some signs in them that with arrows going around the circle. A mini roundabout, I think with the 30-mile speed limit and trying to fit that in, we'd have to have some splitter islands on a mini roundabout. That's as you approach, there's a little island there. Well, we don't have width in the roadway to move the curbs back because we got a sidewalk and then we're at the edge of the right-of-way in the corridor. So there's no way to fit it in. And with the traffic volumes we have, if we're up to 17,000, with 2 lanes going around a mini roundabout, I would highly advise against that. I think it would create an unsafe condition. If we had single lanes going into it, you could do that. But again, roundabouts could present some pedestrian problems. Usually they're very safe for pedestrians, but under a mini design, I'd be a little concerned about pedestrian safety as well, and with 4 lanes particularly.
Okay, thanks. And then the next question, city manager asks about option 2A. Does this design make it more difficult for vehicles to exit private driveways?
We had a similar question a couple of times in our public information meetings. There's a perception that if you have 1 lane and the traffic volume doesn't change, say it's 500 cars an hour, there's a perception with 1 lane, obviously all 500 cars are 1 lane and the spacing between cars is restricted. If you have 2 lanes, the perception is you only have 250 cars in each lane, if you're equally divided, if you had a total of 500. Well, that theory kind of falls apart because the cars don't drive side by side as they go down the roadway. There's always a stagger there. So they're still filling in those gaps. And if you're backing out, you're kind of backing into 2 lanes, whereas here you'd be backing into 1 lane. If you're backing out of your driveway, I think most people do. There's a change in the ability to get out of your driveway, but remember, we reduce traffic speeds. So overall, I think it's a net safety improvement compared to the existing condition that's out there.
Okay, next question. So we're going to go back to the one from Justin from Plan Commission. So I think to break it down, he's asking, firstly, can you terminate roads, also known as like a dead end of a road? I think that's what he's saying. Is that feasible? Let's start with that.
Are we talking about cross streets?
Yeah.
When you have a grid of streets, like we've got in this area with east-west streets and north-south streets, you can terminate, you can cul-de-sac or whatever, is the term you'd like to use, a street and create a T intersection with Jackson Street. That means that traffic's going to go somewhere. It's going to typically go to the next block. So and we've done a lot of what I call neighborhood traffic calming studies, and that's one of the tools. Sometimes you only allow turns into it, so it's kind of like a partial termination of the street, but not cars coming out, which is the higher movement. You can do that, but there's a trade-off, and the people living in the street, along the street next to it, the neighborhood street, they're going to be upset because their traffic increases. So you got to look at the grid and you got to work with the neighborhood if you're going to consider that.
Justin, do you think that answers your question? All right, well, if you come back, let us know if that is a good answer or if you have all your answers. The next, oh, he said yes. Okay, he said sort of. Okay, so next one, we have a question about the school district and the referendum that is being discussed right now. This would impact how the city would move forward with the area between Jackson Street, New York, and Murdoch. So we're talking about that site plan that you discussed before, Ken.
Yeah, I had a chance to get a little better drawing of the preliminary site plan, the concept plan that's out there. And what I saw is the parent drop-off pickup area, I believe, is along Kentucky Street. So and they're heading westbound on that the north side of the street. So I don't see that creating a problem. I would call that proper, good design. One of the things when you look at schools is you separate staff from pickup drop-off areas, which we're seeing more and more use, particularly I think with the COVID and with school buses. And the school buses are relocated and not mixed in on Kentucky Street as their pickup area. So I think the design has to go through the review process with the city, but I don't see any glaring issues in the preliminary concept that I saw that would create traffic issues or safety concerns for parents and children that might be walking as well.
Thank you. Yeah, and I don't know, Alexa, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I was going to try to type this in. This is Jim Collins, but one of the things the city we might consider recommending is a phased approach so that we could then see what happens with the referendum. So once we get to the, through the boards and commissions, when we get to the council, that's something that we've talked about, like maybe you implement the speed signs, in the first phase and then go to phase 2, which might be a partial road design before phase 3. That's just something we've kicked around, which would give us some time to see what happens with that referendum. Doesn't mean we have to do that, but it's just an option.
I would just offer the overall impact. Remember I said if you do them together, there's a synergy that they have a greater effectiveness in reducing speeds and creating a pedestrian friendly area. If you do them incrementally, you won't see as big an impact. And if you know that going in, you can always have a speed feedback sign on the side of the road, a pole mounted. You can use that same sign and put it overhead. If it becomes permanent, you can't necessarily want to go backwards, but you can do that too. But in neighborhood areas, you'd like to minimize the number of poles and so on, extending over the roadway to keep that residential feel. But it's feasible. It definitely is feasible.
Yeah, and that's obviously something we'd have to consider. We realize that you obviously aren't going to get all the benefits if it's phased, but as the discussions go forward, that's something that council ultimately have to consider.
Well, the good news is, we should know by Tuesday night if the referendum passes, but if for some reason it doesn't, I imagine there may be another attempt in the near future. And so just the city being aware of that and, how things might change with proposals and just, making sure there's that line of communication between the two entities.
That would be appreciated.
Yeah, I've had discussions with Superintendent Cartwright. If it gets approved, there'll still have to be a site plan process that the school district could go through with the city to address all of the issues regarding design, but it's premature until design development would happen with the school district.
Yeah, for sure. And I know that the school district has got some input and shared some of the options with, I believe it's with the planning department, but I've seen them as well. And we've given them our initial feedback on, things like the bus drop off and pickup. And obviously it's all preliminary, but there has been communication.
But the one thing nice about school buses, it's the one thing you can control, and there's 3 or 4 different techniques to kind of organize them for pickup and drop off that minimize the impact to the children getting on and off and to traffic. It's almost like creating convoy as they pull out and then they're gone, and how they park the vehicles at an angle or like a regular parallel parking. There's a lot of little tricks to that.
Are there other questions out there, further discussion? Maybe the screen could be unshared. I don't know how many folks we still have with us.
It looks like we've still got 23, which is about what we started with.
Just Laura, Mayor Paul Mary, I see your comment about those designs. I can send you those. They're actually on the school district website. So I'll get you a link to those.
Yeah, maybe all of council should see those.
Yeah, I'm happy to dig them up on the school district website. I can send an email to all of council with that.
Well, and as city manager said, it's still got to go through the other site plan, and won't that go through plan commission as well?
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
There's potentially a number of steps if the referendum is approved that they'll have to go through to actually have that school come to fruition.
Yeah, when we did Oak Lawn, similar process that we took a look at those things.
All right, so then the next steps are November 10th for traffic and parking, and then plan commission, bike ped, and then December 8th, we're estimating it will come to council. Well, thanks to the neighbors and to the consultants and the planning staff and everyone who worked so feverishly on putting this workshop together. And I think that most would agree it's a great benefit to have these joint workshops when it's needed like this.
And I believe Alexa or Steven, this is recorded, right? So that any board or commission members or council members that weren't able to attend tonight can view this before their meetings.
Yeah, correct.
And I do want to just take one more opportunity. This is Mark Lyons, the Planning Services Manager, to thank all the council members and board and commission members, for giving us some of your time today and facilitating this workshop and being part of it. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks to staff and all as well. All right. Well, are we ready to sign off, or are there any other parts to this? Is that the end?
I think that pretty much covers it, Madam Mayor.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Now it goes back to all the commissions, see what they have to think now.
Yes.
All righty. Thank you, Mayor. Have a good evening, everybody.
Good night, everyone.